Picture this. It's November 2004. You're a senior radar technician on one of the most advanced warships in human history. You've spent your entire career learning to tell the difference between a flock of geese, a Russian submarine, and a software glitch. You are, by every metric that matters, very good at your job. And for an entire week, your multi-billion-dollar radar system, the most sensitive air defense detection array on planet Earth, keeps showing you something that cannot exist. Not probably doesn't exist, not statistically unlikely, and not. As in, the laws of physics you were taught in flight school, the ones that keep airplanes from turning into modern art, those laws are being violated in real time on your screen by something the size of a school bus that just dropped 15 miles straight down in under a second without so much as clearing its throat. You'd call it a glitch? You'd call it weather? You'd call it anything other than what it actually was. Except then they sent fighter jets to go look at it. And the fighter jets came back changed. Welcome back to the Phantom Navigator. I'm your host, and tonight we are doing the big one. The one true believers call the Roswell of the 21st century, and skeptics call, fine, one good story, I'll give you that. We are doing the 2004 USS Nimitz Tic Tac encounter, and I am not doing the boring, sanitized History Channel version where everyone speaks in hushed, respectful tones, and nobody admits how genuinely deranged this story is. No, tonight we're going full forensic radar logs, FLIR footage, gigawatt calculations. The guy who built a fictional alter ego just to process his own trauma. The helicopter full of men in black flight suits who allegedly landed on an active US Navy warship and wipes the hard drives like a mafia cleanup crew. And then, because apparently one impossible flying object wasn't enough content for one day, we're going underwater. Submarines, sonar, ghosts, things moving through the Pacific at speeds that should turn a hull into a smoothie. And once we've drained the Nimitz case completely dry, we're going somewhere darker. Brazilian villages getting drained of blood by lights in the sky. Soviet divers shooting in the surface of a frozen lake like champagne corks because something 7 feet tall in a silver suit decided it didn't feel like fighting fair. A man who broke his government silence and was found life ended within 12 weeks, hanging from his own bathroom belt. No note, no warning, nothing. This is going to be long, it's going to be unhinged, and by the end of it, you are going to look at the ocean completely differently, because I promise you, the ocean is not just water, the ocean has a basement, and something down there pays rent. Strap in, let's go to the sea. Every good horror story needs a setting, and ours is generally beautiful in a way that makes what's coming so much worse. November 2004, the Pacific, About 100 miles off the coast of San Diego, the USS Nimitz carrier strike group is out doing pre-deployment training. The unglamorous homework you do before you get sent somewhere that actually matters. Multiple ships, including the Ticonderoga class guided missile cruiser USS Princeton, all moving together like a small, heavily armed city. Here's the detail that makes this story different from every grainy 1950s photo of a flying saucer. That's actually a hubcap thrown in the air. The Princeton has just been outed with the brand new Spy 1B radar system. At that time, this was the most advanced passive electronically scanned array radar in the entire planet. State of the art, cutting edge, the kind of system the Navy spends billions of dollars on, specifically so it never, ever gets surprised. It got surprised immediately. The system was so sensitive that when it started returning data nobody could explain, the first assumption wasn't aliens. It was, we broke it. Which, honestly, respect. Thank you, Adam. Appreciate it. Welcome in. That is the correct human response. Something paranormal happens, and the first instinct of every trained professional involved is to assume they messed up. Not that reality did. We're going to see that instinct fall spectacularly, repeatedly, for the rest of this episode. For almost a full week leading up to November 14th, a man named Senior Chief Fire Controlman Kevin Day sat at the Combat Information Center of the USS Princeton and watched something that, by his own 20-year career standards, should not have been possible. Here's what he saw, and I need you to actually sit with these numbers, because they're kind of thing that sounds like a typo until you realize nobody fixed it. Groups of 5 to 10 targets moving south at a speed of about 100 knots, which for an aircraft is slow, suspiciously, almost insultingly slow. A commercial jet would lap these things. But here's the part that breaks your brain. They were doing this at 80,000 feet. That is the edge of space. That is well above where commercial aircraft fly, almost where most military aircraft fly, in air so thin that conventional wings basically stop being wings, and that at that altitude, you don't loiter at 100 knots. You fall out of the sky like a dropped phone. Hey Thomas, how you doing? Welcome in. And this is the detail that turns this is probably a glitch into everybody stop talking and get the captain. These targets would drop, not descend, drop from 80,000 feet to sea level for sometimes 20,000 feet in under a second. Let's just sit there for a second, because I want you to feel how wrong that is to go from the edge of space to the surface of the ocean in less time than it takes you to say the word impossible. Requires either being a meteor, which leaves a crater and very bad day for everyone nearby, or completely bypassing inertia, drag, heat, and basically Newtonian physics. There was no sonic boom. There was no fireball. There was no debris. They just arrived, like the universe cut and pasted them somewhere new. Then, after hanging out at low altitude for a few hours, doing God knows what, they'd shoot right back up into the stratosphere and disappear. Rinse, repeat, for a week. One-liner for you, free of charge. Somewhere out there, something was doing wind sprints between space and the ocean floor. And the United States Navy was the one gym membership it had. On November 14th, that nightly horror movie finally wandered close enough to active training airspace that the Princeton made a decision that would define the rest of this man's career, and frankly, the rest of UFO's history. They decided to intercept. Enter Commander David Fravor, Top Gun trained, commanding officer of the Black Aces Squadron, a man whose entire professional identity is built on identifying things in the sky correctly and quickly. Because failing to do that gets people unalived. Flying with him, Lieutenant Commander Alex Dietrich, in 2nd FA-18F Super Hornet. They get redirected mid-training flight and investigate what's politely called a real-world vector, which is military for something we cannot explain is happening, and we'd like armed professionals to go look at it. Please. They arrived at the coordinates and look down. The ocean is glassy, completely flat. Postcard calm, except for one spot, a churning, frothing patch of disturbed white water, roughly the size of a Boeing 737, sitting in the middle of an otherwise mirror-smooth Pacific, like someone dropped a washing machine into a bathtub. No boat, no wreckage, no storm, just violence localized with no visible cause. Then they see what's hovering directly above it. White, smooth, about 40 feet long, no wings, no rotors, no windows, no seams, no exhaust, no visible means of propulsion whatsoever. Nothing pushing it, nothing holding it up, nothing that should let it exist in the air at all. It looks, and I cannot stress this enough, how committed every single witness in this story is to this exact comparison, like a giant Tic Tac. And it's not just hovering peacefully, it's darting left, right, forward, backward in rapid, jerky little movements, like a ping pong ball bouncing off invisible walls. No banking, no tilting. The kind of directional change that in any aircraft built by human hands would turn a pilot into paste. Fravor decides to do the single most "we are absolutely doing this episode about you" thing a person can do. He flies closer. He spirals down to get a better look while Dietrich holds the altitude to observe, and the Tic Tac notices him. It stops its erratic little dance It turns deliberately, like it's making eye contact, and starts mirroring Fravor's flight path. As he spirals down, it spirals up, like they're two halves of the same broken clock, locked in an axis with each other. This is not an object reacting to wind or thermals. This is something responding, watching, playing. Fravor pushes closer, trying to close the gap, trying to get a definitive visual, and then, with him about a mile or two out, the Tic Tac simply leaves. Not flies away, leaves. Fravor later describes it as going from a dead stop to completely out of sight in under 2 seconds. No buildup, no throttle up sound effects from an action movie. Just there. And then empathetically, insultingly, not there. Somewhere in that ocean, something looked a United States Navy fighter pilot dead in the eyes, decided he was boring, and left him standing there like a kid who got stood up at prom by a UFO. That is not a sentence I ever expected to write, but here I am. And here we are. Defeated, humiliated, and almost certainly questioning the several life choices, Fravor and Dietrich turned back towards their combat air patrol point, a specific classified rendezvous coordinate. Not a public location, not something broadcast, a point known only to them in their command structure. And then the radio crackles. The Princeton again. Sir, you won't believe this, but that thing is at your cap point right now. Sit with that. The object had traveled roughly 60 miles in under a minute. Faster again than physics had any patience for, and arrived unprompted, uninvited, at a classified coordinate that the pilots themselves had only just decided to fly toward. It didn't just outrun them, it knew where they were going before they even got there. I don't know about you, but that's the moment in this story where I personally would have requested a career change to landscaping. After Fravor and Dietrich's land, rattled, professionally embarrassed, and almost certainly bracing for ridicule, a third pilot, Lieutenant Chad Underwood, takes off equipped with an advanced targeting pod called the ASQ-228 ATFLIR. His job? Go hunt the thing and actually get on its camera. And actually get it on camera. He does. This becomes the now famous FLIR-1 footage, the Nimitz video, the one that eventually ends up on the front page of New York Times 13 years later. But we'll get to that particular act of bureaucratic jujitsu in a bit. What the footage shows, a capsule-shaped object hovering rock steady against brutal headwinds that should be shoving it around like a balloon in a hurricane. Underwood tries to lock onto it using both infrared and television modes. The object actively jams his targeting radar. This is not a passive object. This is something with electronic warfare capability casually swatting away from frontline US fighter jets sensors like it's bored. At the very end of the clip, and if you've seen it, you know the moment the object suddenly darts left and vanishes from the frame at a speed the camera's own motorized gimbal physically cannot keep up with. The tracking system just loses. It's not a malfunction, it's a foot trace the camera was never going to win. Now we get into the part of a story I genuinely love because this is where it stops being spooky lights and becomes let's do some uncomfortable math. In 2019, physicists with the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies sat down with the actual radar tracking data from the Princeton and ran the numbers on those vertical drops. 80,000 feet down in 28,000 feet in roughly 78 hundredths of a second. That works out to over 45,000 miles per hour, roughly Mach 60. Physicist Kevin Knuth calculated the kinetic energy required to move an object that size at that speed and landed somewhere between 1,300 and 13,000 gigawatts. Let me translate that into something your nervous system can actually process. That is more concurrent electrical output than the entire United States generates at any given moment. A kinetic release on that scale inside our atmosphere should produce an explosion equivalent to multiple Tomahawk cruise missiles detonating simultaneously, a blinding fireball, a shockwave, debris, casualties. Instead, nothing. No fireball, no shockwave, no heat bloom on the infrared. In fact, the FLIR footage shows the object radiating colder than the surrounding air, less heat than the empty sky around it. Whatever was powering this thing wasn't combustion. It wasn't anything we have a category for. One more uncomfortable number for the road. Analysts calculated the objects pulled over 5,000 Gs during these maneuvers. For context, a human body crushes to its end at around 9 Gs. The airframe of an FA-18, one of the toughest aircrafts a human build, physically disintegrates at around 18 Gs. Whatever was inside that thing, if anything, was inside that thing was experiencing forces that would turn a Navy fighter jet into confetti. And it didn't even bother to slow down for it. And here's a detail that almost nobody talks about because it's the kind of thing that should be a much bigger deal. There's a theory, popular among radar techs who've worked with the Princeton system, that the Tic Tacs were waiting for the crew to get their equipment right. The Spy 1B had just undergone a major calibration overhaul. When Kevin Day first noticed the ghost tracks, the assumption was a software glitch. So technicians took the entire multi-billion-dollar system down, recalibrated it, cleared the caches, brought it back online. The targets didn't go away. They got sharper. It was only after the Navy optimized its own sensors to peak precision that the objects started doing their full 80,000-foot freefall routine, almost as if they wanted to be seen clearly, and were simply waiting for humanity's equipment to catch up enough to appreciate the show. That's either an incredible coincidence or it's the single most unsettling form of customer feedback in military history. And speaking of electronic shenanigans, when the Underwood's jet tried to get a hard radar lock, the Tic Tac didn't just sit there ignoring him. It actively jammed his radar pulses. But here's the chess move the Navy made in response. Even while the object was jamming the active signals from the jets, the Princeton was still able to passively track it by listening to the very radio frequency energy the object emitted while jamming. Its own electronic camouflage gave away its position. It's the UFO equivalent of trying to hide by yelling, "I am hiding," really loudly. Oh, and if one more weird little footnote that almost never makes it into the mainstream retellings, Underwood, looking at high-res tracking telemetry, noticed two tiny L-shaped protrusions on the bottom of the object. Not wings, not stabilizers, just two little nods. Like antennas. Like something out of a hardware store aisle nobody ever walks down. Some engineers have speculated that these were directional emitters for whatever gravitational trickery was keeping this thing aloft. Nobody knows. They're just there, a deeply mundane detail bolted into the bottom of something that defies the laws of physics. Like finding a "Hello, my name is" sticker on a demon. Here's a part of the story that doesn't get told enough because it's not about lights in the sky, it's about what happens to human beings after they see something the universe didn't clear with their worldview first. Fravor and Dietrich land back on the Nimitz, and the crew already knows word travels fast on a boat with nowhere to go, and the response isn't awe, it's mockery. Crew members tape little green alien cutouts to the walls of the briefing room. Jokes about spacemen follow them around for the rest of their deployment. Two of the most experienced, most disciplined pilots in the United States Navy come back from an encounter that should have gotten a parade and instead get treated like the squadron's resident tinfoil hat division. The fallout from this ridicule was so severe that Lieutenant Commander Alex Dietrich stayed almost entirely out of the public eye for nearly 17 years. 17 years of carrying a story she knew was true and watching the world decide it was a punchline. Senior Chief Kevin Day, the radar operator who spent an entire week watching the impossible happen on his scope before anyone else even believed him, suffered serious post-traumatic stress, not from danger, from isolation, from a chain of command that essentially told him to forget the single most significant event of his 20-year career ever happened. Crew members say they were told to edit or rewrite portions of the deck logs to scrub out anomalous system behaviors, which is military for make this sound boring before someone with stars on their shoulders sees it. In 2009, still unable to talk about it openly, Day wrote a thinly veiled fictional short story called The Seer, about a radar operator who, after tracking something impossible, starts experiencing strange bursts of intuition and a kind of cognitive expansion he can't explain. He literally had to invent a fictional character just to process what happened to the real one. If that doesn't tell you something about the psychological weights of this case, nothing will. And then there's a detail that, depending on who you ask, ranges from spooky establishment to documented Men in Black cosplay performed by actual government employees. Multiple veterans from the Princeton, Petty Officer Gary Voorhees, and technician Patrick Hughes, among them, claimed that within hours of the encounter, an unmarked black helicopter landed on the ship. Two men in plain flight suits walked off, removed every data tape from the secure recording drives, wiped the hard drives clean, and left without a word. Fravor himself has downplayed this part of the story over the years. The radar technicians insist it happened exactly as described. So somewhere out there, there's a hard drive that used to have the most important radar data in the history of UFO disclosure, and the people who erased it didn't even leave a note. That's not just a cover-up, that's a cover-up with zero customer service. And here's the cherry on top, the kind of detail that proves bureaucracy is the real horror genre. When the entire multi-day radar event and Fravor's visual confirmation finally reached the senior captain in charge, his official response was to dismiss it. The strike group was training near the Baja Peninsula, a known smuggling corridor, so the captain decided the most logical explanation was an unannounced, highly advanced counter-drug surveillance drone run by some other domestic agency. His instruction? Essentially, let it go. I want you to imagine being told that the answer to an object descended from the edge of space to sea level in under a second with zero sonic boom, and then waited for two armed fighter jets at a classified coordinate is probably just the DEA being secretive. Somewhere, a cartel boat captain is listening to this and feeling deeply, deeply underestimated. Here's where most retellings of this story stop, and that's a shame, because a part that actually keeps Pentagon officials up at night isn't what was happening in the sky. It's what was happening under the water. Underneath the water. Remember that turning patch of ocean Fravor saw before the Tic Tac even appeared? He didn't just see turbulence. He described a dark, distinct shape just beneath the surface. Something large. Something there. Moving in a way that suggests it was interacting with whatever was hovering above it. As soon as the Tic Tac broke off to engage Fravor's jet, the white water calmed and the shape vanished into the deep. A carrier strike group doesn't just patrol the sky, it secures the water column underneath it. Usually with a nuclear fast attack submarine, in this case, widely identified as the USS Louisville. And while Kevin Day was watching impossible things on radar above the surface, sonar technicians on that submarine were allegedly logging their own impossible things below it. Retired Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet, a career Navy oceanographer, not some guy with a blog, has stated publicly that he's spoken directly with submarine operators who tracked underwater targets moving at hundreds of knots. For context, the fastest conventional submarines on Earth top out around 35 to 45 knots. Torpedoes, designed purely to go fast and explode, max out around 60 to 70 knots. Something moving at 100 knots underwater should trigger catastrophic cavitation, vapor bubbles forming and collapsing violently around the hull, creating a deafening noise signature and physically tearing the surface apart. These things made no sound, no cavitation, total silence, at speeds that should be ripping the ocean apart around them. Here's why that's a bigger deal than the flying part. Honestly, air and water are wildly different mediums. Water is roughly 800 times denser than air. If you fly an aircraft into the ocean at speed, it disintegrates. If you try to make a submarine fly, it has no lift and no aerodynamic shape. The transition between those two mediums is one of the hardest physics problems we have. It's why missiles that hit water at high speeds don't gracefully glide in. They shatter. The Tic Tac and the things underneath it didn't seem to notice the boundary existed. Radar showed objects dropping from 80,000 feet straight down to sea level, then punching directly into the ocean, or simply continuing on as if water and air were this exact same substance, with no splash, no plumb, no displacement wave. Entering the Pacific Ocean at those speeds should produce a geyser several stories tall. Witnesses reported nothing. Total fluid entry, like dropping a hot knife into still air. The leading theory among physicists who've consulted on this, people like Dr. Hall Puthoff, is that these objects aren't pushing through air or water at all. Instead, they're generating a localized gravitational field around themselves, essentially bending the space immediately surrounding the craft. If you create a kind of gravitational bubble, the surrounding molecules don't collide with your hull. They simply flow around the warp space. You're not moving through the medium is sliding around a dent you've made in reality. The one elegant trick solves both the aerodynamic drag problem and the underwater cavitation problem simultaneously, which is either brilliant physics or just a very polite way of saying, we have no idea, but it sounds smart. Humanity spent decades building submarines that have to slow down to avoid making bubbles. And something out there solved the problem by just declining to interact with the ocean at all. We invented stealth. It invented not participating. Because of all this, the transmedium capability of these objects fundamentally rewire how the Navy thinks about ocean security. The entire premise of America's coastal defense for the last century has rested on the idea that the ocean is a moat, a buffer that buys time, that slows down threats that you can hear coming. If something can dive into it from space, undetected, and move underwater faster than our own submarines without leaving a trace, the moat doesn't exist anymore. Following this disclosure, Congress actually modified the Pentagon's UAP tracking mandate to explicitly include transmedium and undersea threats, meaning the deep ocean is now officially treated with the same urgency as the open sky. The ocean used to be the one place we felt safe from things we couldn't explain. That illusion is over. The basement door was unlocked the entire time. Let's talk about how any of this ever became public, because the story of the League is almost as wild as the encounter itself. In 2007, under the sponsorship of then Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, the Department of Defense quietly created a program called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, AATIP, funded with $20 million in black budget money. This wasn't a UFO fan club. It was framed strictly as a national security and flight safety investigation run loosely through the Defense Intelligence Agency and later the Office of the Under Secretary of Defense for Intelligence. In 2010, a career military intelligence officer named Luis Lou Alonso, counter-espionage background, the kind of resume that does not suggest gullible, took charge. By 2017, Elizondo had enough. He'd assemble compelling sensor data, radar tracks, and direct pilot testimony showing these objects were active flight safety hazard near U.S. carriers, and senior Pentagon officials kept stonewalling him, refusing to brief the Secretary of Defense. So Elizondo did something almost beautifully petty in its precision. Instead of leaking classified files like some basement conspiracy guy, which would have landed him in federal prison, he filed an official, completely legal paperwork request right before resigning, asking that the Navy videos be cleared for unclassified official use only, so they could be added to pilot training and aviation safety databases. The Pentagon, apparently not reading closely enough to understand what they were actually approving, cleared the videos. Elizondo resigned, partnered with former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense Christopher Mellon, and handed the now legally unclassified footage, including the Nimitz FLIR-1 video, and later the gimbal and go fast clips, to investigative journalists Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal. On December 16, 2017, the New York Times ran on the front page. The Pentagon, by most accounts, was completely blindsided by its own paperwork. It's the bureaucratic equivalent of getting got by a guy reading the terms of service out loud back to you. They were forced to officially authenticate and declassify the videos themselves by 2020. Here's what almost nobody talks about. The leaked videos were the tips of the iceberg. Through years of radar data, satellite telemetry, and pilot testimony, AATIP identified what Elizondo called the 5 observatables. So I cannot speak tonight. Observables, there we go. Reoccurring physics-breaking traits across multiple separate encounters, instantaneous acceleration with no sonic boom, hypersonic velocities up to 13,000 miles per hour with no visible heat signature, active radar jamming and cloaking, trans-medium travel across space, air, and water with zero performance loss, and flight with no visible lift, no wings, no rotors, no exhaust, nothing. AATIP also commissioned 38 separate theoretical physics papers exploring exactly what kind of technology could produce these traits: warp drive metrics, space-time manipulation, invisibility cloaking through metamaterials, dark energy propulsion. This wasn't a UFO club passing around grainy photos. This was the US government quietly funding actual theoretical physicists to reverse engineer what gravity would have to do to make a Tic Tac possible. And the rabbit hole keeps going. Elizondo and others have since alleged the existence of a much deeper multi-decade legacy program buried inside private aerospace contractors dedicated to analyzing retrieved anomalous materials. This eventually led Elizondo to testify under oath before Congress in late 2024 and to publish a 2024 memoir literally called Imminent, which, if nothing else, is a fantastic title for a book about things showing up uninvited. Retired Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet deserves his own spotlight here, because unlike a lot of voices in this space, he's not a guy with a YouTube channel and a theory. He commanded the Navy's Meteorology and Oceanography Command. This is a professional oceanographer with actual stars on his shoulders telling Congress on the record that the Navy's underwater UAP problem is bigger than the public has been told. Gallaudet has stated he's spoken directly with submarine crews who've tracked objects moving seamlessly across the air-sea boundary with zero disturbance to the surface. and at speeds of outer space, our own submarines. He pushed publicity for the Navy to declassify what he describes as a massive, unreleased trove of a UAP video and sensor data, arguing our current physics simply cannot explain what's in it. And then there is the story that should generally unsettle you. During a 2015 exercise with the USS Theodore Roosevelt carrier strike group, Gallaudet received an email on the Navy's secure network marked urgent safety of flight issue regarding multiple near mid-air collisions with UAPs. The email included what would later become the declassified Go Fast video. The very next day, the email vanished, not just from his inbox, from the accounts of everyone else who received it. Gone, like it had never existed. The subject was never discussed openly again. Gallaudet's own conclusion? The information had been pulled into a tightly sequestered special access program managed by intelligence agency, completely bypassing the normal chain of command. Let that sink in for a moment. A retired admiral is telling you that an email sent on a secure military network about a documented near collision simply ceased to exist overnight for everyone who had it. That's not redaction. That's a kind of institutional sleight of hand that should make every single person listening to this slightly more paranoid about every official record they've ever been told is complete. In November 2024, testifying before the House Committee on Oversight and Accountability, Gallaudet went further, directly accusing agencies like the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office of disclosing only a fraction of recorded incidents and putting out information that is, in his words, patently untrue. A deliberate disinformation campaign. When a retired admiral with an oceanography command under his belt uses the phrase deliberate disinformation campaign about his own government's UFO office, that's not a conspiracy theory anymore. That's testimony. Here's the part that should really bother you. The Nimitz case is famous because of its well-documented, not because it's rare. The USS Omaha, July 2019, off the coast of San Diego, same general neighborhood as Nimitz. 15 years later, a swarm of up to 14 unidentified objects surrounded the littoral combat ships, Omaha, and several other Navy vessels over multiple days, with intelligence briefs eventually estimating over 100 anomalous units operating in the area across the full event. The leaked radar room audio is generally chilling in its mundanity. Sailors just doing their jobs, watching a target accelerate from a dead stop to over 138 knots, and just saying out loud on the record, they're going fast. There's something about hearing trained professionals understate the apocalypse in real time that hits differently than any dramatic reenactments ever could. The FLIR footage from that encounter caught a spherical object, roughly 6 feet across, registering as a solid black, meaning colder than both the ocean and the surrounding air. No combustion engine, no exhaust, no friction heat. Despite moving over 100 miles per hour, the ship's laser range finder tried to lock onto it and got nothing back. LRF armed, no return. Right there on the display, which is military instrumentation for we're trying to measure this thing and it's declining to participate. The sphere eventually descended towards the water with zero splash, zero displacement wave, just clean, frictionless entry like the ocean reached up and swallowed it whole. A submarine searching the impact coordinates, nothing, no wreckage, no debris, no trace. And here's a detail that should bother engineers more than anyone. The swarm maintained its position around the fleet for over 2 hours, sometimes up to 4 in heavy headwinds, at documented altitudes up to 21,000 feet. If these were ordinary commercial drones, their batteries would be ended in 20 to 30 minutes. Under those conditions, nobody has ever explained where the power was coming from, or where a mothership capable of supporting that many units for that long was hiding. Aguadilla, Puerto Rico, April 2013. A Customs and Borders Protection thermal camera caught a small metallic sphere flying at 40 to 120 miles per hour near an airport, plunging directly into the Atlantic without slowing down. And the thermal camera kept tracking its heat signatures moving through the water before the object split into 2 identical copies of itself and flew back out. I don't have a joke for that one. I generally don't. It just split itself in half underwater like it was downloading a torrent and decided to seed from 2 locations. The USS Wasp, 1963. During a Cold War anti-submarine exercise in the Atlantic, sonar operators tracked an object moving at a sustained 150 knots at depth. For reference, modern nuclear submarines top out before 50. The encounter lasted for days, with the object effortlessly outmaneuvering specialized hunter-killer assets sent specifically to find submarines, which is the literal one job those assets exist to do. Golfo Nuevo, Argentina, 1960. The Argentine Navy detected 2 unidentified submerged targets in a secure landlocked gulf, assumed hostile submarines, and responded with depth charges and a full naval blockade. The target split into multiple objects, jammed all electronic tracking gear, and shrugged off depth charge hits. Then, after days of being pinned down, one of them simply surfaced and shot vertically into the sky at supersonic speed, sailing right past the entire blockade. like it was a speed bump. The US Navy quietly sent advisors and equipment to review the data. That data remains classified. A pattern starts to emerge here. It's not subtle. Every single time a modern military with state-of-the-art sensors gets a good, clean, multi-platform look at one of these things, the result is the same. Total performance superiority. Total disregard for the medium it's operating in. And total disappearance the moment we try to actually catch it. Now let's go back further because the ocean's been weird for longer than 2004. Through the 1960s and 70s, Soviet and American submarine crews operating in the North Atlantic and Arctic began independently tracking the same bizarre acoustic phenomenon. Sonar operators nicknamed them Quakers because the signature sounded like a giant metallic frog or a duck quacking through the hull. Call them quackers. These weren't passive sounds. Logs described the quackers actively detecting oncoming submarine approaching it and pacing or circling the vessel. Behavior that reads less like a biological anomaly and more like curiosity. Soviet officers reported that when submarines pinged with their own sonar, the quackers would sometimes echo the frequency back, altered like something testing whether communication was possible. And when they decided to leave, they did so at speeds that caused immediate acoustic blackout. Both sides took this dead seriously. The Soviets formed a dedicated classified task force, convinced the Americans had built some kind of next-generation anti-submarine surveillance system. The Americans assumed the exact same thing about the Soviets. Neither side ever solved it. By the 1980s, the quackers simply stopped. And nobody to this day has a confirmed explanation. Two global superpowers spent 2 decades pointing fingers at other for a phenomenon that, as far as anyone can prove, belonged to neither of them. And then there's the cautionary tale buried in this section, because not every spooky USO story holds up. And that matters too. The 1971 USS Trepang Arctic photos are some of the most famous images of UFO lore. Black and white shots allegedly taken through a submarine periscope of massive cigar-shaped craft crashing through Arctic ice. When researchers actually tracked down the Trepang's commanding officer and asked him directly, he stated plainly on the record, there was no sightings. The story isn't accurate. Most analysts now believe that the photos are some combination of old weapons test balloon footage and Fata Morgana, a polar mirage effect we'll come back to later. I include that not to deflate the episode, but because it's important, some of this stuff is real enough to terrify retired admirals into testifying before Congress. Some of it is a misidentified balloon and a French tabloid with a deadline. Knowing the difference is what separates an actual investigation from a ghost story, and frankly, the real cases are unsettling enough without needing to borrow credibility from the fake ones. All right, we've covered what happened. Now let's talk about why. Because this is where the story splits into about 5 different flavors of paranoid, and I generally love all of them. Theory 1, the US versus the us versus us theory. The simplest, most boring, and therefore weirdly most plausible explanation, the Navy was an unwitting test subject for a classified US program, possibly Air Force, possibly DARPA, testing an experimental propulsion breakthrough against the Navy's brand new Spy 1B radar, just to see if our own best detection tech could track it. Under this theory, the entire Nimitz encounter is a black budget pop quiz, and the Navy failed it spectacularly in front of everyone. Theory 2, quantum laser holograms. A more exotic version suggests that the Tic Tac wasn't physical at all, that it was an advanced electronic warfare projection. Using airborne lasers to ionize the air and create a solid-looking radar reflective heat-emitting illusion. This elegantly explains the impossible speed if you're just moving light, not mass. It completely fails to explain what Fravor watched churning under the actual ocean water. Which is the problem with most, it was just a hologram theory. Holograms don't typically agitate the Pacific. Theory 3, non-human intelligence. The classic no flight surface, no heat signatures, full transmedium capability. Proponents argue this points to an intelligence simply operating several tiers above our own, treating air, space, and ocean as a single seamless environment because to them, maybe it is. Theory 4, and this one's a personal favorite, the corporate keepers theory. Whistleblowers like David Fravor have suggested that whenever the military captures data this definitive, the actual physical evidence and investigation get routed immediately into private aerospace contractors. Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, names you've definitely seen on a defense budget chart, operating under special access programs so restrictive they're legally shielded from Congress oversight for FOIA requests and even presidential review. Under this theory, the government can deny having alien technology with a completely straight face, because technically on paper, it doesn't. A private company does. It's the same loophole that lets your favorite app technically not sell your data, while definitely selling your data. Theory 5, Immaculate Constellation. Rumored to be a parent-level, unacknowledged special access program specifically designed to intercept and quarantine high-quality multi-sensor UAP data before it ever reaches the standard military archive. Under this theory, those men in black flight suits who's allegedly landed on the Princeton and wiped the hard drives were genetic spook. Oreo. They were contractors executing a very specific, very practice security protocol, making sure cross-correlated radar and visual data like the Nimitz case never sees daylight through normal channels. Theory 6, and this is the one that ruins my sleep, the Sentinel AI theory. This one proposes the Tic Tacs aren't piloted crafts at all, but ancient, self-replicating, autonomous probes, a von Neumann network left behind by a non-human intelligence millennia ago, quietly monitoring Earth's oceans and atmosphere. Under this theory, when the Navy powered up the Spy 1B radar, it acted like a beacon, alerting a dormant network that human technology had crossed some new threshold. The Tic Tac mirroring Fravor's flight path wasn't an act of aggression or curiosity. It was diagnostic. It was a diagnostic. An algorithm logging human reaction time. We weren't encountering a visitor. We were being benchmarked. Theory 7, the hollow Earth adjacent trans-medium base theory. I love any theory with hollow Earth because I myself totally do believe in a hollow Earth theory. Given that the Nimitz, Omaha, and several other major encounters all happen near deep ocean trenches, some researchers argue that these objects aren't extraterrestrial at all. They're indigenous, an advanced civilization that lived in Earth's least explored real estate. The deep trenches for longer than recorded history, occasionally surfacing to check on us like a downstairs neighbor who comes up when the music's too loud. Oddly enough, I have heard this theory so long ago. So I used to, for a couple years, I used to live in Montana. And of course, I had friends at the time that were like-minded, of paranormal and unexplained, just like me, into that. And this is one of the theories that several different groups had. They believe that some of the UFOs that we have seen or whatever are not actually from outer space. They're from our Earth. There's people living on our Earth, and they come up occasionally in what we think is UFOs from space. Yep, just they're in our ground instead. There is also a theory of some of these groups that there are caves. There are caves that lead both in Montana and Alaska. Both have cave systems somewhere that actually go down into the hollow Earth where these other people are. Other people, maybe other animals, whatever you think is down there. Other civilization. Supposedly there's a route down there, like I said, from Montana or Alaska. I don't know where. That is a theory. Theory 8, the psychological warfare honeypot. The most cynical and possibly the most dangerous theory that the entire event was deliberately staged domestic psyop designed to leak falsified radar data to adversaries like China and Russia, convincing them that the US possesses physics-breaking technology, forcing them to waste billions chasing a fiction or panic into thinking America has already won a technological war nobody announced. 8 theories, 0 consensus. 1 Tic Tac, take your pick, and understand that whichever one you choose says more about how much you trust institutions than it does about what was actually in that sky. Before we go fully into the dark stuff, I want to give you the 5 bigger picture angles people use to make sense of all of this, because each one changes the entire emotional temperature of the story. The scientific skeptic's best argument isn't hoax, it's Fata Morgana, a superior mirage caused by thermal inversion layers bending light over the horizon, stretching distant mundane objects into impossible shapes. It's a real, well-documented phenomenon. Its one fatal flaw in this case: it explains visual sightings, not radar. Radar doesn't care about light bending. Radar saw the same objects doing the same 80,000-foot freefall the human eyes did. A mirage cannot do that. The geopolitical angle treats this less as a ghost story and more as a national security nightmare. If a rival power develops gravitational or transmedium technology that could bypass our entire defense network undetected, the entire US military becomes functional obsolete overnight. Some analysts argue the slow drip of disclosure isn't really about aliens at all. It's a signal to adversaries: we know what you're doing, and we know you have something we don't. The linguistic angle is sneaky and underrated. The shifts from UFO to UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomena, wasn't an accident. UFO is culturally radioactive. Reporting one in 2004 was professional unaliving. By rebranding, the Pentagon effectively sanitized the topic enough for serious scientists and engineers to study it without career risks, while quietly keeping ownership of the conversation inside classified aerospace circles, instead of letting it become a populist or quasi-religious movement. The anthropological angle zooms out across all of human history, from the celestial chariots in the book of Ezekiel to the fiery shields reported in ancient Rome to the ghost rockets that swarmed Scandinavian skies in 1946. This lens argues we're not looking at something new. We're looking at the most recent, best documented snapshot of something that's apparently always been here, and we've simply finally gotten good enough at recording it. And then there's the ontological shock angle, which we're going to come back to at the very end of this episode, because it might be the most important one of all. What actually happens to the human mind and to the human civilization The moment we're forced to admit we are not, and possibly never were, the most advanced thing in the room. Okay, we've done the careful source congressional testimony version of this story. You came here for the unhinged dark history, and I have been holding back? Not anymore. Guadalcanal, 1944. In a brutal jungle fighting of the Solomon Islands campaign, a Marine platoon reported being actively hunted for 3 consecutive nights by a self-illuminated sphere about the size of a basketball. It didn't drift, it hunted, gliding inches above the jungle floor, weaving perfectly between dense trees, stopping directly outside individual foxholes, emitted a low, rhythmic, almost biological, pulsing sound like breathing. One maritime, presumably at the absolute end of his psychological rope after God knows how many days of actual combat, plus a glowing thing that breathes outside his foxholes, jumped up and unloaded his rifle onto it at point-blank range. The bullets didn't ricochet, they didn't pierce it. Witnesses say their rounds slowed down on contact and melted, dripping off the surface like liquid wax onto the jungle floor. The sphere then flared a binding red hard enough to give several men instant nausea and nosebleeds before launching straight up at a dead vertical 90 degrees and vanishing. If you ever needed a single image to summarize, the universe does not care about your rifle. It is a United States Marine in the middle of World War II, emptying a clip into a glowing orb and watching the bullets turn into candle wax. Operation Prado, Calares Islands, Brazil, 1977. This is, without exaggeration, the darkest documented chapter of this entire genre. Because it is the one time a national military formally deployed armed personnel specifically because a civilian population was being actively physically attacked. The locals called them chupa chupa, the sucker sucker. Small probes and larger cylindrical craft that would hover over the thatched roofs of mud huts and fire concentrated beams of light directly at people inside. The medical record here is generally horrifying. Dr. Waleed Sassim Carvalho, the local clinic's director, initially a skeptic who assumed mass hysteria, treated over 35 victims and documented a disturbingly consistent pattern. Instant, full-body paralysis the moment the beam made contact. Victims could see and hear, but not move or scream. Localized burns on the chest and neck that were hot but oddly not immediately painful, followed within minutes by rapid tissue death. At the exact center of each burn, tiny clusters of micropuncture wounds like a cluster of needle pricks. Within a day or two, victims experience a sudden, severe hair loss around the injury site, plus acute, medically inexplicable drops of red blood cells count. So severe and so fast that locals generally believe the lights were extracting blood through the light itself. At least two life endings were directly linked to the attacks. One woman's chest burn related life ending was quickly filed as a heart attack, and the government blocked an independent autopsy. Which is the kind of detail that turns strange local folklore into deeply credible cover-up in about 4 words. The Brazilian Air Force responded with Operation Prado. Captain Urange Hollanda, leading a small armed intelligence team with night vision and long exposure cameras. Over 4 months, they compiled over 500 photographs and roughly 15 hours of motion picture film, documenting glowing spheres, 100-foot metallic cylinders, and classical saucer shapes emerging directly out of the waters of Marajo Bay, accelerating into the upper atmosphere in hypersonic speed, moving in rigid zigzags that ignored inertia entirely. For 20 years, Hollanda kept his oath of silence. In August 1997, he finally broke it. Sitting down for a raw, multi-hour interview with Brazilian researchers, he described being cornered repeatedly by craft hovering less than 100 feet above his team's jeeps. One cylinder, hovering over a river, turning the surrounding air so suffocatingly hot and humid that his soldiers could barely breathe. He stated flatly that he believed the objects were conducting a systematic military-style aerial survey of the Amazon basin. His words, almost verbatim, they were covering the region in precise strips, exactly the way we conduct our own aerial photography. And then there's the detail that turns this from unsettling history into actual nightmare fuel. Hollanda and a close colleague both claimed to have woken up in secure military quarters with sudden, intense arm pain, only to discover small, hard implants embedded under their skin, physically palpable, completely invisible on standard military x-rays. 3 months after the interview, 3 months, Captain Hollanda was found unalived in his home, officially ruled as his own doing, hanged from the second-story banister using the belt of his own bathrobe. No notes. Several of his personal journals reportedly vanished around the same time. He had told his interviewers on cameras that he feared retribution for breaking his silence. I'm not going to tell you what to believe on that one. I'm just going to point out that a man spent 20 years in silence, finally talked, and was found unalived within a season, and that the official paperwork closing the case fit on a single page. Lake Baikal, Siberia, winter 1982. Soviet military divers conducted a routine tactical exercise under the ice belt. Under the ice at around 160 feet, encountered several humanoid entities over 7 feet tall, wearing tight-fitted silvery suits, spherical helmets, no visible breathing apparatus of any kind in water that should end the life an unprotected human in minutes. Assuming foreign saboteurs, the Soviets' commander ordered his team to net one. As the divers closed in, the entities didn't fight back physically. They emitted some kind of acoustic telekinetic pulse that instantly propelled all 7 divers from the depths straight into the surface. A rise that fast triggers catastrophic decompression sickness, nitrogen expanding violently in the bloodstream, tearing muscle from bone, rupturing blood vessels. The team had access to a small 2-man decompression chamber. 3 of the 7 divers' lives ended in agony, packed into each chamber, built for less than half their number. The remaining 4 suffered permanent neurological damage and were discharged. The entities, according to the declassified account, remained completely undisturbed, somewhere in the deep, frozen dark of the oldest lake on Earth. Because it matters, notice that almost none of the darkest, most violent encounters happen in deep space. They happen in jungles, in lakes, in trenches, in the water just off a coastline. The terrifying stuff isn't arriving from somewhere else. It's already embedded in the places we were told were just empty. The ocean has a basement. The jungle has a landlord, and we've been paying rent without ever signing a lease. There's an old Celtic idea, a thin place, a location where the wall between the physical world and whatever else out there gets paper thin. And when you actually map these globally, something uncomfortable happens. Ancient mythology, modern military sensor failures, and forensic disappearances all start lining up in the exact same coordinates. The Superstition Mountains, Arizona. The Apache called it the home of the thunder god, a literal portal to the underworld, and forbade their people from climbing it. In the modern era, well over 600 people have their lives ended or vanished on this small federal wilderness. In 1931, treasure hunter Adolf Ruth disappeared. His skull was later found on a different mountain than his body, with 2 point-blank bullet holes in it. Other hikers turned up months later, fully skeletal, with their boots and clothing laid out perfectly beside them, untouched. Certain rescue teams report complete electronic failure near the central volcanic formation called Weaver's Needle. Ground penetrating radar shows massive hollow chambers that vanished on a second scan. Fully charged GPS units draining from full to no battery in under 5 minutes. Accompanied by a static charge, pilots described filling in air itself. Lake Baikal and the surrounding Sayan Mountains. Beyond 1982, diver incident, Soviet Cold War radar consistently logged ghost targets diving into the frozen lake at a at a 90-degree angle without tracking the ice or registering on sonar. Hiking groups in the surrounding mountains have vanished entirely or been found unalived from internal trauma. Burst capillaries, ruptured eardrums, profound blood loss, with zero external signs of struggle. The exact same biological signatures you'd expect from intense electromagnetic exposure. The Bennington Triangle, Vermont. Local tribes called Glastonbury Mountain cursed ground, warning of a living stone that could swallow people whole. Between 1945 and 1950, a cluster of bizarre disappearances occurred, including a man named James Tedford who vanished off a moving bus. His luggage and an open timetable left on his empty seat, the bus never having stopped. Only one body was ever recovered. Frida Langer, found in terrain that 300 rescue workers had already searched months earlier. Decayed in a way that made most exact cause of life ending impossible to determine. Pilots flying over the area report sudden radar blackouts, planes vanishing from tracking for minutes before reappearing miles off their projected course, with disoriented crews and garbled radio static. Skinwalker's Ranch in Uinta Basin, Utah. The Navajo named this region the Path of the Skinwalker, a shape-shifting malevolence roaming the ridges. In 2007, the Defense Intelligence Agency funneled $22 million black budget dollars into the basin under a program called AAWSAP, deploying not ufologists but combat veterans, intelligence officers, and PhD physicians. What they documented wasn't just lights, it was bodies. Researchers suffered acute radiation burns, sudden aggressive cancers, and permanent neurological damage, eerily similar to what's now called Havana syndrome. After contact with invisible localized magnetic fields, and then there's the hitchhiker effect, soldiers who've returned home thousands of miles away, only for poltergeist-like phenomena, shadow figures, and floating orbs to start manifesting inside their own houses, terrorizing their families. The anomaly, by the DIA's own internal conclusion, appeared to be contagious. The Devil Sea of Miyake Island, Japan. Ancient maritime lore speaks of a sleeping dragon in the trench. Blamed for boiling water, rogue waves, and ghost ships that mimic friendly silhouettes to lure sailors into rocks. Between 1952 and 1954, hundreds of personnel vanished in this stretch of ocean in clear weather with zero distress signals. In 1952, Japan sent a state-of-the-art research vessel, the Kaio Maru No. 5, carrying 31 scientists, directly into the area to map its volatile seismic activity. The ships sailed in and was never seen again. No oil slick, no debris, no bodies, nothing. A heavily monitored government research vessel simply erased. The pattern across all 5 locations is the same: a real documented geological catalyst, volcanic basalt, a continental rift, hyperconductive mineral deposits sitting directly underneath centuries of indigenous warning and decades of modern technological failure, which raises the deeply uncomfortable possibility that reality doesn't have uniform thickness everywhere. It has seams, and every single one of these places is a seam that something at some point decided to use as a door. A handful of last entries, because once you start pulling this thread, the whole drawer comes out. Non-Mandal, Pompeii, Micronesia. An abandoned megalithic city built on a coral reef made from roughly 750,000 tons of basalt. Some single stones weighing 50 tons moved across a mountainous island by a small population with no wheels, no draft animals, and no metal tools on record. Local legend says 2 sorcerers built it using sound, chanting frequencies that made the stones fly into place. In 1907, the German colonial governor defied local taboo and broke open the sealed royal tombs, allegedly uncovering skeletons over 7 feet tall. That night, a freak localized storm battered the island, and the governor's life ended suddenly of a mysterious, fast-moving illness. His own people reburied the bones and left. Operation High Jump, Antarctica, 1946 to 1947. Immediately after World War II, the United States launched the largest military expedition ever sent to Antarctica. Not a science team, an armed task force, nearly 5,000 troops, an aircraft carrier, submarines, destroyers, dozens of aircraft, officially framed as cold weather equipment testing. Scheduled to last 8 months, it was abruptly aborted after 8 weeks following a string of classified incidents, multiple aircraft losses, and the lives ended scrubbed almost entirely from the press. Returning home, the expedition's leader, the legendary Admiral Richard Byrd, gave an interview to Chilean newspaper, warning that the United States needed to prepare for a new kind of war against an enemy capable of flying from pole to pole at incredible speeds. Make of that what you will. I have made several things of it, none of them comforting. The Chronicle of Acacor, Brazilian Amazon, 1970s. A man calling himself Tantunka Nara, claiming to be the prince of an ancient tribe, described a 3,000-year-old underground city called Acacor, hidden beneath the rainforest, built by gods from the sky. Connected by tunnels stretching across multiple countries, most academics dismiss the whole thing as an elaborate fiction spun by a German conman. But then the body count started. In 1980, American explorer John Reed went looking for Acacor with Tantunka Nara as his guide and was never seen again. In 1983, a Swiss explorer named Herbert Wehner did the same. Years later, searchers found only his jawbone. In 1984, Carl Brugger, the journalist who'd written the original book, was shot unalived on a beach in Rio by an assassin who simply stepped out of the shadow and was never identified. For a motive that remains to this day completely unknown. Real city or elaborate cover story for something far more mundane and far more human either way. Three people are unalived, and nobody's ever explained why. Let's land this plane gently, unlike most of the objects in this episode. There's a concept called ontological shock. The psychological disorientation model of reality gets shattered. For the entire span of record human history, we've operated under one quiet foundational assumption. We are the smartest, most capable thing on this planet. We build the cages, we map the territory, we write the rules. If full, undeniable disclosure ever actually happens, not a leaked video, not a congressional hearing, nobody watched, but real, total confirmation that we share this environment with something whose technology treats our best physics as rough first draft. Sociologists who study this stuff don't predict a single dramatic moment of mass panic. They predict something slower and weirder. Minimization first, where most people simply look away because it doesn't affect their commute tomorrow morning. Then a kind of cosmic ego dissolution. The same blow to cultural confidence that historically devastated less advanced civilizations the moment they encountered a vastly superior one. Then a geopolitical reckoning. Because the entire premise of national governments resting on the promise, we can protect you, collapses instantly the moment something cruises through restricted military airspace and dives into the ocean with total impunity. And finally, maybe a strange kind of force unity. Because tribes only ever truly stopped fighting each other once they're forced to recognize a bigger shared reality standing over all of them. Scientifically, it's just as brutal. An object pulling 5,000 Gs with no heat, no sonic boom, no explanation isn't just inconvenient data point. It's quiet admission that our models of gravity, inertia, and space-time are fundamentally complete. Every physics textbook becomes a rough draft overnight. And here's the genuine, thought-provoking part I want to leave you with, because I think it's the realest thread running underneath every single story in this episode. From the Tic Tac to the basalt city to the lights on the Amazon, maybe the reason this feels so unsettling isn't that something new arrived. Maybe it's that something old never left. And we just finally built sensors good enough to stop pretending we didn't notice. So here's where I leave you tonight. A retired admiral is on record saying our own government is lying about how much of this it actually has. A man who broke 20 years of silence was unalived within the season. A radar tech had to invent a fictional version of himself just to survive what his own job showed him. And somewhere off the coast of San Diego, in the exact spot where a Navy fighter pilot once got stood up by a 40-foot white Tic Tac, the water is, statistically speaking, probably just as calm and glassy tonight as it was November 2004. That's the part that should actually bother you. Not the lights, not the radar logs, the calm. Because nothing about this story suggests it was a one-time event. It suggests a pattern, a presence, a tenant that's been quietly renting space in our own oceans, our jungles, our deepest lakes, for longer than any of our institutions have existed to deny it. So next time you're standing at the edge of any large body of water, a lake, a coastline, doesn't matter. And it's that particular kind of still, glassy postcard calm that Fravor described right before his entire understanding of reality got mirrored back at him by something with no visible means of propulsion. I want you to just sit with that one question. Calm for who? I'm your Phantom Navigator. I didn't find any answers for you tonight. I'm not sure anyone has, but if you felt that little chill just now, do me a favor and tell someone else about this story before you go to sleep. Because the one thing scarier than something living in the deep is the thought that you're the only one who knows it's down there.